Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode when we will discuss on urban sustainability. World Talent Economy Forum. We are working in emerging economy. Specifically, we are focusing on urban infrastructure development. So we have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob, and he's an expert who can help us to develop the strategy for urban planning. Mr. Rob Enderle, what you want to discuss about today's topic? And your floor is open.
Yeah, it certainly is, because I'm the only one here today. Okay, so sustainability for urban planning. One of the difficulties we've got, of course, are a lot of the cities that we currently deal with were constructed over decades, sometimes centuries, and urban planning, at least with regard to sustainability, is a relatively recent concept. The cities tended to grow ad hoc. They might have started off with a small town. Things are built around it. The level of planning was low. Disney was Walt Disney was a believer in extreme urban planning, and Epcot, which was his concept of the city of tomorrow. And you can find it on YouTube if you want to see what the plan was. It didn't happen, sadly, because a little bit of backstory is because when Walt Disney set up to build a city in Florida, a number of his attorneys decided to buy up the land around the project, and that made it so, and it was his own attorneys that did this, that made it so he couldn't expand Epcot to city scale. And so in effect, the attorneys he was paying made sure he couldn't create what he wanted to create. But it was one of the first cities that was really designed with the future in mind. It was a hub and spoke model. Traffic flowed into the center, flowed out. It was logically designed where commerce was centralized, transport was thought through, logistics, water delivery, electricity was all well planned so you'd have high efficiency, and that was done in the 1950s and 60s. And of course, technology has advanced quite a bit since then. So the way that you really have to look at sustainability with regard to urban planning is, one, you have to begin by looking to the future, because any program you're going to build in an existing city, unless you're going to do greenfield, you're going to create a city from scratch, much like Bill Gates is attempting to create here in the United States. Then you can do some really interesting work, but in most cases you're going to be retrofitting, and so that really means you need to sit down and set your priorities, and you need to plan for the way the world's going to be in, say, 10, 20 years. And the world in 10 and 20 years is going to be hot. And so you're going to have to take into account the need to get rid of lots of heat, and you're also going to take a look at a lot of the mistakes that have happened in the past with regard to the overuse of concrete. For instance, here in the United States, in parts of the West, a lot of the cities, I take Las Vegas, for example, that are in very hot areas, are also use heavy concrete, and concrete reflects heat. It makes the area much hotter. It's not conducive, of course, to plants or moisture retention, and so the end result is if you build a city with lots of concrete, it's going to get hotter. And if you're already in a trend where the world's getting hotter, building a city that is inherently intolerant to heat, or it's going to become hotter faster, means you're going to have to think through things like subterranean transport. You're going to have to think through things like geothermal heat sinks for cooling. Otherwise, your energy use is going to be very high, and you're really going to have to think about aggregation. How are you going to protect the ecosystem for what will likely be a significant fire risk as things heat up? And so, and as you're thinking through this, of course, you still have to minimize waste. The whole goal of sustainability is to reduce waste overall, or at least be able to manage it, so it doesn't harm the environment. And that means setting up with concepts that allow people to do things like recycle heavily. The city would need to be designed as efficiently as possible so that folks don't have to use things like bottled water, which spread plastics, and of course plastics don't biodegrade very well, and they contaminate. They can contaminate lakes, rivers, and oceans. And so the goal would be to really think through the city, how it consumes, how it disposes of its waste, and where at all possible, how it reuses and repurposes the stuff that it creates. And in many cases, it's going to have to be self-sustainable. The idea that 20 years transport's becoming more and more difficult. Weather events alone are causing massive transport tie-ups. And we just here in the States, we had another hurricane come through and take out one of our large medical distribution warehouses. And so there are going to be countrywide problems with regard to medical shortages as a result. And so for places that are critical, like say medical storehouses, reservoirs, and generating plants, you're going to have to harden them to a greater degree to handle the anticipated coming weather event. So you're building for efficiency. You're building to as much as possible deal with and get rid of heat, not reflect or store it, and at least not where you don't want to store it. And you really need to think about minimizing waste and then efficient ways and sustainable ways to dispose of it. Landfills are problematic. One is they become a really bad place when you're done. And I know people build on them, but if you have earthquake risk at all, landfills can liquefy, and the buildings then will fail. And so you create this large area of garbage, and then in that garbage you have toxic chemicals, you have biohazards, you have fire risk, and you pretty much lost that land for use for anything else. The toxic chemicals and stuff make it unreliable or at least unwise to use it for agriculture. And the tendency for the land to liquefy under earthquakes, if you've got earthquake risk, make it unlikely to be used, or at least not wise to use for building. And so it become architectural eyesores. It's problematic, and the way the amount of garbage the world is generating is significant. And we've certainly looked at things like putting them on barges and shipping them to other countries, shipping garbage to other countries, but that's not sustainable either. And that just moves the problem from one geography to another. And when we're really concerned about the overall health of the globe, that can be problematic. It's a stopgap at most. And so what you're really trying to design for is not just for the mechanical aspects of the city, but making sure the population will get educated and, if you will, trained in how to properly dispose of and to moderate their own consumption in a way that doesn't create a larger sustainability problem. And that last part's difficult because a commerce lives on consumption, and a city typically lives on commerce. Sales taxes, in particular, are tied directly to commerce. And so if you've got a sales tax built economy, you're going to have incentives that are working against you in terms of sustainability. And so another piece of advice is when you're building the economics of an urban environment, to think through that aspect and maybe not use sales taxes as a revenue generator, which creates puts you at cross purposes to sustainability. Certainly taxes on if you want to tax something, what you might want to tax is overconsumption. People that overconsume and use it as a penalty, but make sure it doesn't work itself in and become an incentive for city policy, because the city is actually promoting overconsumption as opposed to trying to stop it. Taxes are really a dual-edged sword. You can use it to slow behavior, and sales taxes do that. It can do that, but the problem with it is because they're generative. Then cities can become addicted to those sales taxes and then less willing to put in place provisions that lower consumption because it hurts them economically. So you've got to watch for some of those cross purposes, at least isolate yourself, the decision makers, from making decisions that damage the sustainability function. And The other thing you can do, of course, if you're building from scratch, is really think about the city's makeup, the population makeup, and aggressively try to attract a population that agrees with the city's goals. One of those goals being sustainability. So you're building an environment of like-minded individuals, at least with regard to taking care of the environment and behaving the way that you would like them to behave in the city, and that can actively reduce the amount of aggravation you would otherwise have trying to corral the citizens that don't want to do the right thing and practice a sustainable lifestyle. And then you can do that with regard to incentives as well, building up incentives to showcase and highlight those people that are behaving the most sustainable. Awards, often it's recognition though that ranks higher than cash, and physical things that rank higher than cash as well. So looking at ways to recognize folks that stand out as being very sustainable, and when possible, putting people in power that fully believe in the mission that you've set forth for the city that you're trying to construct. So it's a bit easier if you think through the dynamics of building a city to do a greenfield type of effort. Trying to come in on an existing environment and changing that environment to something else is problematic, because you not only have to train people and what it is they need to do, you've got to motivate them to take the training, and you have to undo the beliefs that they've had that were outdated or frankly wrong. And people don't like change, and that becomes a much more difficult path. So whenever building an urban development and trying to make it very sustainable, it's going to be a lot easier if you do a greenfield. And the other thing with at least starting with a greenfield effort is that it can become an example for others to emulate. You can showcase the benefits in terms of lower costs of maintenance, better health, lower medical costs, the satisfaction and happiness of the population. Those all become metrics that you can use to drive the initiatives in existing cities by holding up the greenfield new city effort as an example, and using that to drive behavioral changes in existing populations in other cities. But it's something governments don't particularly do well. They tend to want to talk about the successes that they have. They look at other cities as competitors, and they will downplay the benefits of better management in order to make them look better, and not make them look, and certainly not make them look bad against the performance of the other areas. And dealing with that political problem is always problematic. But again, once you start with a greenfield city, at least you can establish that city well. And over time, even if you can't get through the media aspects, the miscommunications, the fact that the city is healthier, is more successful, is better for business, should drive behavioral changes overall. But marketing is something that governments don't do well. I think it's a mistake, because that's how you get a population to move with the government as opposed to against it, and how governments avoid unnecessary conflict with their populations. And then finally, of course, with current generation of technology, we are capable of connecting every citizen back to the government and giving those citizens a voice, and designing that communication concept into a city, and making sure it's looped in and circular, so that the citizens get feedback based on their commentary, suggestions, or complaints, and that the citizens feel engaged with their city. They feel like they're part of the process, and at the very least, that their interests were considered when a decision was made, which often isn't the case with most governments. Most governments tend to operate in isolation. They operate with the belief of what the citizens want, without ever asking the majority of them what they want, and often focus more on telling the citizens what they should want, as opposed to asking them what they do want. And even if government feels they're right and the citizen is wrong, when you're trying to convince somebody to change a particular path, if you don't understand the path they're on, it becomes much harder. So the better the government understands its population, not only the better it will serve it, but if it needs to change the mind of that population, the more capable they will be to do that. It's all about being able to really control the population, short of using violence or extreme methods like we've been seeing in France of late, and that really does require a much deeper engagement with the population, and that needs to be designed into the plan. So I'll stop there and I'll pass over to Mark, so you're not just listening to me go on. And Mark, thanks for joining. I thought I was going to be the only one on today, and really didn't want to be. So I'll pass.
No problem. Glad to join. It's definitely always interesting conversations around urban sustainability and things in that space. But one of the things that you were saying that was actually putting a smile on my face, because I sometimes feel that cities do a lot of representative talk and a lot of conversation about what they want from their citizens and everything, but sometimes they get caught up in the quagmire of the minutia of what they are doing. And I would give an example, like I know here in Durham, there have been several focus groups around urban transportation, several focus groups about what the city should look like or what should be happening, as Durham, where I am at, is representative of many states, in not just the United States, but around the world, in the sense of looking at urban planning and the impact of certain things that are going on within urban planning, like gentrification and a number of other things, where poor neighborhoods have been severely impacted and are trying to figure out what their new model will look like and how they can get a piece of the pie. Because we do know that the urban core is oftentimes what people are looking at, and is the ones that get the bigger side of the development that goes on. Like if you take Durham, for example, our downtown is very thriving, just like Raleigh's downtown is thriving, and a number of the other cities here in the state of North Carolina. I would even argue Charlotte and Greensboro have thriving downtowns as well, but not so much of the other areas. And of course, like any place, even if you're in Bangladesh or Kenya, if you're in outlying areas, you want to be sure that you get a piece of the pie as well. So it's always interesting to see these various focus groups that are going on and in that space. And a lot of times people are frustrated because, like you just said, Rob, they like to make sure that their voice is heard, but sometimes they don't always see the result of the studies. So the focus group organizers, the different people that are sometimes the experts that come in to have these studies, and sometimes they can be at national or even international organizations, they don't always do a good job of reporting back to the citizens that have been doing all of these reports and having all of these conversations. And that can be very frustrating to those that have participated, because I know several people that have participated in some that I've been part of, and then they're like, where's the results? When do we see the results, and what are the results going to be? And then sometimes the results are in these kind of grandiose periods that are far down the line and everything. So they're hearing people saying that, well, we're going to have all hybrid vehicles or all electrical vehicles, and I'm just using mass transit as an example, by 2050 or 2075, and people are going like, well, it's 2023. What am I going to do between now and 2050? It sounds good in theory, but a lot of times we as humans want the immediate impact, and we want impact sooner versus than later. And of course, there are outside forces that can be frustrating as well, because I know here in North Carolina, a lot of people would love to have the kind of mass transit that exists between areas like rail and other things, but it is not in the interest of certain corporate partners to have that for their own reasons. And I know that there has even been a major university here, Duke University, that has fought against light rail because it might not be as beneficial to them as people think it is. And in some ways, they are feeling that it could be harmful to their brand or whatever. So they might have their own reasons. And without having one of them here to explain those reasons, I'm not going to try to put words in their mouth. But I do know that there are different theories that people have in that space and all along those lines. But one of the things I was going to add, and then I definitely can get into conversation with Dr. Sharif about some of the things that I have brought up in just a back and forth conversation, is there is a group here recently that did a study, and it was something that you brought up, Rob, and everything. And it was young kids. I want to say they were all under the age of 15 or 16, but they were given a chance to envision what they saw their city like, namely the city of Durham in 2100. And one of the things that surprised me, then I think it surprised a lot of folks, is that the kids really wanted urban gardens. So a lot of the people are frustrated by the notion of what they see even as kids as the high cost of food and a number of other things that frustrate them. And a lot of times they live in deserts that they call food deserts and all in that space. So they are trying to figure out ways that would actually improve their food situation. So that was one of the things that I saw on a number of the pictures and wish list of them, because it was almost like a kid focus group where they got to draw what they wanted. And a lot of the buildings were also, instead of spread out, which we know historically is how buildings have been built, were more vertical. So I also think that a lot of the kids are thinking of a more vertical society as opposed to a horizontal society, which is historically what we have been. So those were two things. And like I said, I'll be at that center later on this evening and everything. And I might go back and look at some of those pictures and think about some of the other things that they wanted. Of course, they also wanted flights of fancy that even me and Rob wanted back in the day and everything. And who knows, they might be less flights of fancy eventually. But a number of the kids, of course, wanted flying cars and ways to get around in that space that might be faster and quicker and all along those lines. And of course, some of the kids did have concerns about robots, and a number of the kids also had concerns, which was good to see because it shows that they are concerned about social issues as well. But a number of the kids were trying to figure out housing and ways to solve the homeless problem as well, which exists not just here in the United States, but also exists globally as well. So just some of my immediate thoughts about urban sustainability and the fact that our kids are also paying attention to that as well. And I don't have any kids of my own, but I'm sure that my nephews, when they're not busy with their Oculus sets, might be thinking about some of these issues as well, as they are about to be teenagers, about to be 14 and 15 next month, because August is both of their birthdays, even though they are a year apart. So they will be celebrating 14 and 15 on next month.
Mr. Rob, as we are discussing about urban sustainability, how US actually playing role for sustainability, how they educate their people or their industry for sustainability?
Well, in the United States, we basically have a two-party system, Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrats tend to feel fairly strongly about sustainability. It's one of their predominant motivations, their platforms. Republicans, not so much. Republicans tend to be funded much more by petrochemical companies and large industry, and they are, for the most part, against regulation. Sustainability is a negative thing, and they've recently gone to war with the word woke, which for some screwy reason, even though I've yet to find a Republican that can define it. So the parties are relatively equally matched, though the Republican Party has been in a bit of decline of late, thank heavens. And I say that having been a member of that party up until just a couple of years ago. So the end result is we're a country in conflict, and often what you can have is, for instance, when Jimmy Carter a few years back was president, he was aggressive with regard to solar power, putting solar power on the White House, and the richest part of my family, which owned the water company in Phoenix, Arizona, decided that, hey, this is the way we're going to go. And they invested a lot of money into solar. And then Jimmy Carter lost his reelection. Ronald Reagan came in, canceled all those programs and buried them. And the richest part of my family suddenly became the poorest part of my family as they all lost their shirts. So the good lesson in why not to overinvest in something that's brand new, particularly something that's politically tied and tied only to one party. So it's kind of a mess here overall. Currently, we are on a path to electrify automobiles, much like Europe is, though we're behind to a large extent. Where I think Europe is. And surprisingly, we're behind where China is. China is looking to emerge as the world leader in electric automobiles, at least in terms of volume, and they are quickly eclipsing pretty much everybody else. And I should point out the electric cars from China, while initially they were pretty much crap, they've gotten a lot better, and now you could argue their best are in line with Tesla. And of course, Tesla has always had build quality problems. So in the end, they become kind of a force to be reckoned with. And given the fact that China creates about 3/4 of the world's pollution, it's probably good that they are being very focused all of a sudden on sustainability, because the amount of pollution they're generating is unsustainable. I found out a few years back that the smog I'm complaining about, or was complaining about, in California wasn't coming from California anymore. It was largely coming from China, which doesn't make you feel a whole lot better. All that work and the smog's being imported. But but the focus on at least cutting back on petrochemical emissions has been pretty aggressive over time. In areas like where I grew up, which was in the Orange County area, California, which used to have smog so heavy in Riverside you couldn't see through it. I mean, literally, you had a hard time seeing the hand in front of your face, and if you went outside, you had a hard time taking a deep breath. You were breathing in so much poison, it just made it very hard to do anything, let alone, I mean, exercise outside. Just walking outside was problematic. And that got cured over time. Now Riverside's actually pretty nice, not a lot of smog there anymore. And of course, the irony is with Los Angeles, they actually had smog before they had the city. You can have pollution that aggregates because you've just got a unique weather situation. And LA is a place where smog or smoke aggregates. And so back when we had Indians in the area, the Indian fires would create smog in the LA basin. We'd call it the LA basin back then, but the create smog in the LA basin even before there were cars. And some of the things we've certainly done over the years, we're using Los Angeles as an example, were poorly thought through. For instance, LA initially, as it was constructed, had a massive electrical public transport system. In fact, it was said that virtually everybody in the city rode that system at least once a day. And then sadly, in the middle part of last century, they started converting over to automobiles and buses, and that exacerbated, of course, the smog problem. Then it wasn't until the 70s when we started to really tamp down on the smog of the vehicles that smog problem started to mitigate. And then, of course, more recently, the last couple of decades, they've ramped up public transportation again. They're putting back all the stuff, or trying to put back all the stuff that was ripped out decades before, and trying to get people back into public transportation. And we're talking about urban planning. I think the way to do it, and this was part and parcel to Walt Disney's City of the Future concept, Epcot, was the fact that most people should be taking urban transportation, should be taking a rail, because you can make that, even if you're using electric diesel, diesel electric, the amount of pollution that a train puts out is quite a bit less per person than the amount of pollution a car puts out, especially when you have individual drivers and no ride sharing. And with public transportation, you can manage traffic. Now, we do have technologies coming in that should allow us to better manage traffic with automobiles. The autonomous car technology, particularly when we get vehicle-to-vehicle communications up, will allow the cars to negotiate where they go, and for the most part, should allow them to miss being backed up in traffic and not moving, because it wouldn't make sense. So what you would see in that situation is, you go to your car, you want to go someplace, and you might queue up at your house and just say, no point in getting in your car now because you're not going to be allowed on a freeway. But you can get in your car in 15 minutes from now. That's when your queue opens up, and you'll get a clear shot. And so rather than queuing up at freeway entrances, you can just stay home and read or work from home until your queue comes up, and then you get in your car and you transport. And of course, that really won't work until we get to a critical mass of electric cars. In fact, it probably won't work until we get human-driven cars off the road, because when you get human-driven cars off the road, you can drive fast at tighter tolerances, and you can put more cars on the road at speed than you can with human drivers. But the problem is, if you do that with human drivers, and the human driver makes a mistake, now you get a much bigger accident, because you're dealing with physics. So while the robotic cars may instantly know that there's a problem and try to stop, they're moving at speed in close proximity. The physics don't work for you. They just can't stop that fast physically. And the shortcoming of any autonomous vehicle are physics. If they could violate physics, then you could have really zero accidents with any autonomous vehicle. But with physics, you've got issues, because you still have to overcome the fact that if a car hits ice, if a car is going too fast to stop immediately, or in the time frame that you need it to stop, no machine's going to help you there. It's the nature of being ballistic. So really thinking through what to your question, the U.S. is trying to implement more, at least in democratic cities, implement more public transportation, move more aggressively to electric vehicles, and for the most part, try to get people out of vehicles altogether, and then operate on a more sustainable basis, implement much higher degrees of recycling, and promote reuse at an ever higher rate. So you're creating less pollution to begin with, and then the part where we're probably not very good at is motivation and oversight. Most of these programs don't come with tremendous incentives. There are some. The money that you get back for turning in certain kinds of metals, for turning in glass bottles, those are incentive programs that do have a certain amount of benefit. However, we do notice that rather than doing what they're supposed to do, which is get people motivated to go out and pick up trash and take it to recycling centers, a lot of the folks are going into recycling bins, taking the bottles and cans and taking them to recycling centers, which when they do it, they tend to make a mess with trash all over the place. But number two, now you're giving an incentive for nothing, because that stuff is going to go to a recycler anyway. And so you're not fixing a problem. You just introduced some inefficiencies into it. And yeah, you've given some people an income, but those people aren't really providing value. So figuring out how to keep people from dumpster diving, at least into recycling bins, to pull out stuff and get those incentives, has proven, at least as far as I've seen so far, has proven ineffective. And I think the hope is just it doesn't become so much of a problem that it invalidates the overall program. But in the end, at least the folks are trying to do it. We're trying to overcome, as a nation, the issues of a two-party system and the fact that a lot of the decision makers just don't believe in sustainability. But despite that, we are making progress. One of the big issues we haven't been able to wrap our heads around is plastics recycling. Plastics recycling just has not gone well, and largely due to the fact that plastics, and I should point out tires are in this class as well, that tires and plastics just, for the most part, don't lend themselves to recycling. And the plastics industry did something that was kind of underhanded, in that they made plastics look like they're recyclable even when they weren't, but by using symbols on the bottom of the plastic bottles and in the plastic that imply recyclability, but the materials being used are not. And the tires in of themselves, though using the current formulations, are not recyclable. You can, and we have discovered you can use them in asphalt in terms of roadways, but asphalt really isn't good for the environment either. It's a petrochemical product, doesn't degrade well. It works all right for roads. So if you really want to see roads, go back at look at the old Roman roads that have lasted for centuries, and then compare their utility to and longevity to the roads you build with asphalt, and there's no comparison. So we could build better roads, though admittedly at much higher cost. And still on roads, one of the things we are exploring is the idea with electric cars using electrical fields in the roads to charge the cars as they drive, because the problem with electric cars remains that the nature of the batteries and how you charge them. And when you're traveling, you need to charge the batteries fast, which pre-ages the batteries and results in you having to recycle them. And the materials in the batteries, particularly the lithium, is highly toxic. And often those batteries are still not recycled, and the recycling industry with regard to electric cars is still in its infancy and hasn't really ramped up, largely due to the fact we don't have a lot of electric cars. It's kind of a cart horse problem. You can't ramp an industry until you have stuff you can use in it, and you don't have stuff you can use in it until you can ramp an industry. So the cars are coming first, the recycling's coming later, and that means you really don't want to have to recycle those batteries until the industry is ramped up. And the longer you can make the batteries last, the happier everybody is. By the way, I should point out, I just had the battery in my electric car get damaged. The cost to replace it was $100,000. The car's value was only $42,000, resulted in immediate totaling of the car. Who knows what's going to happen to that battery? But now I've got a new electric car. So it showcases we still have some issues to work through in terms of how we deal with electric powered vehicles, and particularly how we recycle the batteries.
Hey, Rob, isn't part of the problem, and you kind of alluded to it, this mindset issue as well? Because you were talking about recycling and a number of the other things I was thinking, and I remember as a child definitely collecting bottles and soda bottles and going to get a quarter here or a nickel there, and it would add up to some money, and all along those lines. And even now I know that there have been people that have sent their electronics to different stations to collect money, because there are definitely efforts to have your cell phone or your computer, but definitely your cell phones, recycled, and some of the other smaller electronics. I know that there used to be one at a grocery store not that far from me here and everything, and I don't even think that that is around anymore, because it was like a vending type machine where you literally could drop in the cell phone and then get a cash return of some sort or another, and all in that space. And like I said, I don't know that enough people were using it, therefore why bother having that particular vending machine and everything. So I think that grocery store may have also left as well, but definitely I don't think that that particular option is there. So whether it's that, or I think I brought up on a show in the past, I remember when composting used to be a very popular thing that folks would be getting involved in now, but a lot of times people are trying to do the quick, fast, and in the hurry kind of mindset. And there are also some very powerful lobbies, because as you were talking, I was going like, yeah, that sounds good in theory. And I would definitely, as a non-driver myself, getting around by mass transit, love to be able to jump in a vehicle that is controlled by others so that I can get around in a car, as opposed to the bus that I get around now, or the train that I have used on occasion, and all those kind of lines. Because like any party, I would love to have my own vehicle, but there are different ability things that go on that I discovered decades ago that cause me not to be a driver and all in that space. But if there are self-driving, then it's not as much of a issue, whatever those different abilities may be, and all along those lines. But definitely I would love to be able to come and visit you in a electronic car. But I also know that, as you just mentioned, that gas and oil industry is not exactly rushing to have us go electronic or to go non-fossil fuel, and some of the other things that they are very much in the control of. And there's even a major industry, and I'm going to pick on it now a little bit, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. But there's a major industry that literally came from a criminal activity, but it's very popular, that is right here in North Carolina, called NASCAR. And I'm not saying it's only in North Carolina, because the Indianapolis 500 and other car things are in various parts of the country, including where you are out in the West Coast. But it is very popular here in North Carolina. Thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people go and watch the races. And I don't know that they're necessarily going to want to watch Robot Charlie race in the car versus watching Dale Earnhardt, even though Robot Charlie, if he is destroyed, might be a little bit better than Dale Earnhardt or some other person losing their life in one of those races, because we also know that it can be a very dangerous sport as well, because cars can spin out of control and people can lose their lives. And if it is Robot Charlie or Robot Ann, it's not as much of a concern. You can hopefully replace those quicker than you can an actual human life and everything. But NASCAR is also a powerful lobby, so I don't know that they're necessarily going to be rushing to see the robots take over. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on those issues that I just brought up, which is the nature of the power of some of these lobbies, and the fact that we can be very liking the fads when the fads are popular, but then after the fad dies down, we're not as big into it. Because I think about how many people, I mean, you still got a lot of people that go to whole paychecks, but you've also got a lot of folks that don't go to whole paychecks because they are frustrated with the pricing, and it is not as much of a fad to get the natural foods as it used to be earlier in the time. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about those comments that I would make to this nature, Rob.
Well, so some of the stuff. And you're right. The vending machines that took cell phones back didn't work out all that well. Mostly because the cell phone companies, or at least the retailers, allow you to exchange your cell phone when you get something else. So I have a feeling that a lot of those vending machines were getting stolen cell phones,
right?
And it was promoting cell phone theft, which could have been a little bit problematic for the retailer. Where if you've got a cell phone and you get a new phone and you can get a credit for turning in your old one, just makes sense. You turn it in when you get the new phone, and then the old phone is recycled, actually repurposed for the most part until it ages out, and then who knows what happens to it. I feel like it probably ends up in a landfill someplace. Some are recycled, but a lot of them probably end up in landfills. But that's with regard to that. You mentioned NASCAR, which I always find funny. NASCAR started off being, you brought your car, you modified it, you put it on the track. Now that cars in NASCAR have really nothing to do with the cars they look like. They're fiberglass bodies on racing frames. and they're all required to be very close. And it's a rich guy. If you look at the racers, they're all rich kids. And if you really watch a NASCAR race, they run around the track, don't do a whole lot for almost the entire race in the last 2 or 3 laps, and they go ape shit, try to kill each other. Right. It's the most bizarre motorsport, I think, on the planet. And it's just an oval track. Sometimes they do go on a road track, which I think is a lot more fun, but most of the time it's just a big oval track. So it's like,
it's just a big oval track, like you said. And like I said, it was based on that's what I was alluding to. And for those that are watching globally, it was literally based on the moonshine industry, because it was folks that were trying to escape the law, and they were
regular cars.
White lightning.
They were hopped up regular cars. And so at least back then you could say, well, I could make my car go that fast. Yeah, there's no way in the hell you're going to build a NASCAR car and drive it on the road. So that connection got lost someplace. And you mentioned robotic cars. There is the Robo Racer series that's trying to get off the ground, where you've got robotic race car, and each one's autonomous. Each one has its own brain, and I guess you could bet on them. But the thing is you'd always have it in the back of your head that the race was fixed, because it would just be easy to say, oh, we're going to have 2 or 3 win this time. It's not like the robot's going to raise ethical questions about making them throw the race. So there have been real issues driving interest into it, because it's not like you can get excited about the driver, because there isn't one. And the only thing that really makes it exciting is at least several of the trials, it's going great, and all of a sudden the robot racer decides to commit suicide and rams at full speed intentionally into a wall someplace. You go, okay, well, that's great. It's not really giving me a lot of confidence in autonomous driving. However, and if you watch the Formula E, which is the electric car races, same kind of issue. They made it a requirement so that if you ran out of power on the track, the driver had to push the car back to the paddock. Which, if you think about electric car, and it was supposed to promote electric cars, and if you think about electric cars, our biggest problem is the concern about running out of power. And so now we've got drivers pushing powerless cars back to the paddock. It just exacerbates that concern. It's not making people want the car anymore. Right. It's making people even more concerned about the problem that the car has. It was just, I sat back and a client of mine, Qualcomm, was sporting the race, and I asked him, why the hell are you doing this? This isn't helping us move towards electric cars. It's scaring people from electric cars. This isn't doing you any good at all at this particular point. These rules make no sense whatsoever. So and of course, the other funny thing about the Formula E was, at least when it started, they couldn't swap the batteries. And so rather than refueling, the drivers had to swap cars, which was just completely impractical. So in the end, it's gotten better over time. If you do get a chance to watch Formula E, it's like watching a bunch of large remote control cars. The smell's the same. You smell burnt rubber and ionization is basically all you smell. It's like going to a remote control car race, but at scale. So it's fascinating. And we also talked about urban transportation. I think the part of the issue is one is the automotive industry isn't a huge fan, and they remain relatively powerful. But the other is people got this idea that they wanted to be independent. Everybody wanted to have their own vehicle. That was part of the promotion, and somehow if you used public transportation, you were low class. Fixing that mindset isn't going to be easy. Though I do notice that I think in Japan they'd probably do the best job of any geography in terms of having trains that are highly stratified, where only the elite are able to take some of the trains, and it kind of removes the stigma connected to trains as being low class, because some of their trains are awesome. I mean, they're like rolling palaces, and in some cases you've got to wait months, if not years, to even get a ticket to ride on one. So it creates that aspirational aspect of trains, and I think it just kind of showcased, it's not just low class people that run trains; it's high class people that ride trains. They just ride different trains, and changes the underlying dynamic. But we do kind of have to get people off this idea of everybody's got to have a car, because that's just not sustainable. Everybody doesn't need a car; they do need to get around. And if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, they've been of late, tearing up roads, putting in trees, putting in greenways, bicycle paths. And really trying to think through what would a green environment look like, and riding a bike, riding it through a green field as opposed to a roadway is much more personally satisfying. It's better for you physically, Certainly, the air is far cleaner, and the end result is those environments tend to rank as some of the most contented in the world. The people are happier, they're in better health, and even though I would say the weather in some of those areas being where they are is pretty awful. Despite that, the people are in excellent shape and in relatively good spirits. I think they're showcases of what should be done. And imagine what if we did those kinds of things in environments that were much better, much warmer, much happier. You would think we could even do better than the Scandinavian countries in terms of
creating. We would, and everything. Hey, Rob, just really quickly, as you were saying that, I was just wondering, a quick thought crossed my mind. There were several things that were very popular, and we have them here in Durham, and I know they're out in the West Coast. There are different companies that run them, Lime and a number of others. So there was this e-bike movement, and I've even seen people scooting around the roads at 61. I'm not sure that I want to go falling down, and I'm not sure that I am comfortable with my own coordination. I'm just going to be perfectly honest. That's why I haven't inserted a credit card or gone on one yet. Doesn't mean that I won't, but I do know that at Duke there are also, and I think maybe even UNC, some of the cars that you literally can insert your money into or insert your credit card in. They're like the e-bikes. You can use them. I'm sure that they have things in place because we are still a licensed society. So I'm sure there are things
mostly apps now, mostly done through apps now. They don't really have much in terms of inserting cash. Mostly it's handled through, you have an app, the app charges your credit card, and off you go. And you got electric scooters, electric bikes. And if you're in San Francisco and some other areas, you've got electric autonomous cabs. And you just use the app, and those cabs, most of the ones in San Francisco are electric too. They're not just autonomous. In fact, they use the Jaguar I-Pace as their base car, which is what I drive. But that allows you to basically use the app on your phone to that's what I was
asking for our international audience. Do you have to have is there ways that they have proof that you have a license, or can you just get into one of those electronic cabs? Because I've seen those cars that look like almost regular like cars and everything. They're a little bit smaller framed and everything. But can you literally use your app, get in them, or there things that are put in place to make sure that you have a license to use to put it?
So for the autonomous cabs and stuff, you're not driving; it's driving you. So it wouldn't matter if you had a license or not. If you are using an app to get a rental car or a peer car, so that you've got services that allow you, it's kind of like Uber but without the driver, right, where you have car sharing, you have to pre-qualify. And so that before you're allowed to use the app, you have to provide your license, your finance, because if you borrow somebody's car and you wreck it, right, it's covered by the insurance that's on the vehicle, but you also have some, if it's your fault. In other words, if you cause it, you take that car out and you decide, okay, well, I'm going to jump a river and see what happens to wreck the car. Then the insurance company is going to say, yeah, we're not paying for that. Right. You're paying for that, and you've got to make sure you've got the financial resources to do so. And you can be held criminally liable if you intentionally damage one of the vehicles. That's using what I know about how the practices are in the U.S. But most of the practices I've seen have gone multinational in some way, shape, or form. And so I imagine that it's at least where they're consistent across countries. That's how it's being handled.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about. Because definitely, I was even thinking, maybe they'll get electric shanties, because I do know that some of the third world countries and second world countries have those vehicles that are even less stable than some of ours. But some of those I've seen are even stronger than our e-bikes.
Yeah, there are services that allow you to ride on motorcycles, and so not so much here, but in other countries your taxi might be a bike, might be a motorcycle, or even a sidecar. And they've got those little 3-wheel contraptions that look like death on 3 wheels that are fairly common in other parts of the world. But yeah, there are certainly varieties of transportation. Back to urban planning. The less variety I think that you have with regard to transportation, the better off you're going to be, because the easier it is to regulate and manage. And one of the issues, of course, if you've got multiple vehicles on the road, is the weight difference between the vehicles. And so if you've got a lot of very lightweight vehicles like bicycles on the road with a lot of heavyweight vehicles like semi-trucks, there are going to be a lot of dead bicycle riders. And so you want to try to restrict the roads wherever possible to optimize for their primary mode of traffic. So roads that are handling heavy freight probably shouldn't be roads that are also handling lightweight bicycles or transport.
No, we don't need
bicycles
that
and
kind of
bicycles
roads.
really need their own trails and roads so that the bicycle riders are safe from motor vehicle drivers that are driving unsafely.
Rob, you brought up a question, and I know that our international audience would love to hear your thoughts about this. But I have some thoughts as well. But do you feel that we are using enough of the old stuff that used to exist? Because you mentioned the trains, and I know that even here in Durham was totally built on old train tracks, and some of those old train tracks are still around, and there are people that are trying to function those train tracks, whether that is being refunctioned for some other form of transportation, including light rail and everything. But I just wonder, as one that studies this, do you feel that we're doing enough of that?
We did that in California, and the fast rail, the train that's always under planning and never seems to get built, was supposed to use existing railroad infrastructure, which means it wasn't going to be as fast as some of the stuff in Asia, particularly China and Japan was going to be much faster, which didn't make a ton of sense to me, but it would certainly save money. So yeah, repurposing can be effective. It really depends on how long those railways have gone without maintenance, because they can become very unsafe over time. And the cost of replacing the rails isn't substantially more than the cost of putting them in the first place. Yeah, you have to build the rail bed, but when you have to go in and yank out all that heavy metal, there's a cost to that. And though the big advantage, of course, the right-of-ways are already there, which is primarily, I think, what people are trying to reuse this stuff, is the cost of getting right-of-ways can be more expensive than the cost of building the rail in the first place. So by using existing right-of-ways, they can build things faster. But I would much rather see people putting in more newer rail structures, because the number of trains we currently have derailing is pretty high, and largely due to the fact that the infrastructure is aging badly, and so putting in place at least current infrastructure as you build this stuff out would seem to me to be a much safer way to deal with the issue, particularly if you're talking about rail freight. We have a heavy rail come through our town here, and I'm constantly sweating one of those toxic chemical trains. Derailing and then making it so I can't actually live in my own home, which could be problematic. So there are issues with regard to maintenance when you're
definitely issues with maintenance. Definitely issues with maintenance. I've got to teach you about a couple of things. One is the Cultural Arts Center that I work at. Literally, the train goes through downtown, and we're not that far from downtown. So sometimes when the shows are taking place, and our shows are generally around 7 or 8, they can be disrupted. And sometimes the shows have a train theme or a train motive, so it does fit in with certain stories or certain things that are going on, but sometimes it doesn't fit in at all. So sometimes it's like, the middle of a deep scene, and then the train is going by with its bells and whistles and everything. So it can be quite humorous, and I'm sure that frustrating for the artist as well. And the other thing I was going to say, and this is just me being teasing and everything, but I do know that probably some of our, and as many folks know that watch either Pod TV or watch what Sharif does here and everything, knows I am a lover of animals, not so much the nuisance animals, but definitely a lover of animals, cats and dogs and rabbits and deers and everything else. And the vermin animals will probably be glad if we don't disrupt or use those tracks, because it has become their home lately, whether it's in Durham or whether it's in California. So they will probably be glad if we leave those old tracks alone, because quite a few of them, that is now their personal residence, and they would be perfectly fine if we leave them alone so that they can have their home. Now, we might not want them to have their home, because like I said, some of them are some serious vermin that are out there as well, but I'm sure that they would be perfectly fine with us not disrupting them.
Yeah, it's good. Well, we probably need to wrap this up because we're coming up to the top of the hour.
Yes, agreed. Sharif, it's on you.
Want to close this out? Sharif? Hello?
Sharif is off.
I can see his drapes moving.
I see him moving too, and he's having a thought. He's on deaf. He's got it on mute. I said deaf, but I meant mute, and I don't know what he's got going on. Maybe he's got another conversation going on with his students, but I see him there. He is definitely there, and all along those lines. So, Dr. Sharif.
Dr. Sharif, you want to close this out, buddy?
Yeah, I want to close the session. And what's your concluding remarks for today?
Oh, yeah, easy. we kind of went through that, but it's all right. So the concluding remarks is it's always better if possible to create a greenfield city virtually, and we can do it virtually now and use it as an example for what can be done, and then use that as a template to drive initiatives in existing cities based on the cost benefit analysis that you do for those existing cities. But I think a greenfield is really the place to start. And then if you are going to go ahead and build the city, think of all aspects of it, how you're going to build the population, how you're going to move the population, logistics, and plan for the way the world's going to be 20 years from now, not for the way the world is now, because otherwise much of what you're trying to build will be obsolete by the time you build it. It takes about 20 years to fully fill out an urban plan. And so you want to design for the way the world will be when you complete, not the way the world will be when you start.
And just my concluding remarks, I agree with a lot of what Rob just said. Is urban planning is very important, whether you are here in the United States or whether you are in Brazil, whether you are in Kenya or other parts of the world that are definitely looking at ways to either maintain their cities or redevelop the existing cities there, but even creating new cities that are not cities at the moment. They might be rural areas that are now going to become more urban and other things in that space. And the other thing that I kind of alluded to that we are doing here in Durham and that I hope a lot of other people are doing as well is don't just listen to the urban planners and those folks that are creating these things that are in that space. And there are some amazing planners, including some that are historical. I think about what Benjamin Banneker did with Washington, D.C. as an example of great urban planning and all along those lines, but also listen to the youth voices. And that is something that I have seen, even those that might not be actual urban planners yet, but that might be part of their career, but they have some very interesting ideas of what they would like to see in the cities of the future. And a lot of times we, as the folks of a older generation, are planning a city that they will be the ones living with much longer than we will be. So I hope that we are listening to the voice of the youth as we are planning the cities of the future. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government agency, corporation, and academy. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.